Welcome to the International Sommerfestival here at Kampnagel in Hamburg today. My name is Lena Kollender. I'm the co-curator of the festival. It's a festival for theater, performing arts, visual arts, music and theory. And first of all, I would like to thank the Körber Foundation that cooperated with us on this conference and supported this event. And also the federal government's representative for cultural art and media, who funded this conference in the frame of the Alliance of International Production Houses. Also, I have to thank Sascha Surke of the Zeit Foundation, because Mr. Samir Saran, who will speak on our last panel today, is in Hamburg due to his invitation to his Bucerio School on Global Governance. This first panel is an introduction to the mechanisms that underlie the disruption of democracy, and we'll start with Hannes first, and then 3 short lectures by Richard Gutjahr, Antonio Martínez, and Paul Hilder. And this panel will only have a very short Q&A at the end, but if you're patient, in the next panels we will have a lot more time for the discussions and questions and so on, so come back and we will have a lot more time to talk about these things. But now I would like to introduce Hannes Grassegger, who's the curator of this conference. Grassegger is an economist and reporter based in Zurich. His writing centers around how the digital transformation changes the way we live. He is known internationally for his groundbreaking investigations on Cambridge Analytica and more recently the Facebook censorship guidelines for content moderation. In 2014, he published his book Das Kapital bin ich, I am Capital, arguing that we should become the sole owners of our data. Hannes works as a reporter at large for Das Magazin in Zürich and for Reportagen in Bern. Hannes has won several awards for journalism and was recently shortlisted for Germany's prestigious Nannen Award. His work has been translated into over 20 languages and published via ProPublica, Süddeutsche Zeitung magazine, Weiß, Die Zeit, amongst others. So, welcome Hannes, thank you for being here and doing this with us.
Guten Morgen. Thank you so much, Kampnagel, for having me here and bringing me all the way from Switzerland and into this beautiful city. And thank you all for coming here on this early and sunny morning. I know how much you appreciate sun in Hamburg. And thank you for coming from sunny California, or Washington State, right? Antonio Martínez. Thank you, Paul Hilder, for coming from London. And thank you, Richard Gutjahr, aus München gekommen. Gestern oder aus Berlin? München heute Morgen. Vielen Dank. So, to understand what is currently going on, I want to go back to 1970 Chile. Voila. So there was a fascinating project run by the socialist government of Salvador Allende. The project was named CyberSyn. And the idea was to have a central planning facility for the socialist planning economy, meaning a control room where you could receive information about the economy of Chile and send orders. This was actually based on ideas that had been This was actually based on ideas that had been developed around 40 years before that. The idea of cybernetic feedback loops was created starting in the 1940s, and the concept was to regulate any system through flows of information. Ideas about this were developed by Norbert Wiener and Vannevar Bush, amongst others. He was the person who created this beautiful goggle system that helps you scan literature whilst reading, and closely reminds me of the Google class. So all these concepts were pretty old, and these concepts didn't only catch on with socialist planning economies that had the idea of understanding their markets and had the problem of gathering information about it, but also with market economists. So at the time, you see that little machine in the back down there. This is a machine simulating the money flows in the United Kingdom, developed by a guy named Phillips, pretty famous economist, and all based on cybernetic feedback loop ideas. The obvious problem at the time, and also why Allende's project didn't work, is that we didn't have the means to get all that data you need to properly model and understand and run such a feedback loop system. So here we are in 2016, and I'm writing about the digital means for the Trump campaign. And it's actually the story of a scientist named Michal Kosinski, who gathered a lot of personal data and developed a method of understanding these persons' deepest feelings and their character. Then a military and propaganda company named Cambridge Analytica comes in and uses this method, first to help Brexit, then to help Trump. Both win, and since then, everything is, let's say, disrupted. The world was shaking. The future of Europe and the US is somehow unclear, and there was a state of shock after the election of Trump, at least in Europe. Things don't seem to become better. So we had recently a US president threatening to use nuclear weapons and throw the bomb, which coincidentally was the hashtag for my story, or the story I wrote with Michael, my colleague. So I believe we are just actually seeing the beginning of a much deeper and more fundamental disruption, a true reformation of the way we are living together. And this conference is actually meant to help you develop an understanding of the technologies behind this and of what's going on. It's a conference in 3 stages. The first panel will be about the mechanics of this whole process. The second, at 2 o'clock, will be about how Europe is currently being overturned politically by digital parties, or let's rather say movements. And the third panel will be an outlook about whether the whole state system as we know it might become overturned in this coming digital age. So let's start today with Richard Gutjahr, who is a well-known TV anchorman in Germany, and who in 2015 produced Do Not Track, one of the most fascinating television sequels about the usage of personal data and personal data markets in Europe. The second panel will be about, the second speaker will be Antonio Martínez, who will help us understanding the feedback in the system, which is the Facebook ad targeting system that Antonio helped create. He's also the author of the fascinating personal account Chaos Monkeys, his life in the Silicon Valley. Lastly, Paul Hilder, who's been involved in some of the most fascinating digital campaigning initiatives, such as Avast.org, Change.org, and the Bernie Sanders campaign, and now is a co-founder of CrowdPack, a big data and digital campaigning platform. He will help us understand how money flows into that system and how it's applied in politics. So let's start out with Richard. I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannes. Thank you, Kampnagel, for setting this up. This is a great conference, and thank you for listening to me for about like 20 minutes now. I want to take you onto a journey. We're going to go through like a lot of dark places, but I think I know the way. This is Martin Luther. We have the 500-year anniversary of Martin Luther, and I think Martin Luther has changed the world in ways that the people back then had no idea about. And I think we're about to enter a similar stage, if not even bigger, with the digitization of our world. So the take that I take from our world and what has been going on with data throughout the past, let's say, 20 years with the upcoming of the World Wide Web is, this was the world that we were used to live in, right? This was our perception of the world. For me as a TV anchor, this is like the map that's been shown on like at the beginning of our news broadcast ever since. Now, what has changed over the past, let's say, 10 years? There has been like a new world coming, and it looks a little bit like this. And no, this is not Game of Thrones, this is rather Game of Phones, so to speak, because that is a kind of a new digital layer that is sitting on top of the old world. I would not go that far that we are yet completely in what Bundeskanzlerin Merkel described as Neuland, but we're getting there. So this is the situation that I think we're living in right now. So there's still the old like physical world that we're all like in here together. Thank you for coming. But there's also like that digital layer that goes on top of it. And here's the intriguing part. I think one world cannot live without the other anymore. There's no way that we could plug like out of the digital world anymore. Nobody would hand out his phone or her phone again because we're so attached to all this world. So data becomes a little bit like electricity or water coming out of your sink or whatever. So, me coming from the media, and this is really intriguing, this changes everything, because we all grew up with radio, TV, books, and this concept doesn't work anymore. What has happened over the past years? So if you were Gutenberg and later like you had a printing press, so you could teach the people what they were able to read, right? You had the means of production, and the people were just in a very passive way with mass media just to respond to that. Actually, they could do nothing without having a frequency or a publishing house in their back, so they could only like passively consume. So what has changed over the past 10, 15 years? Suddenly, from mass media, we're turning into an era of media of masses. And here we have to witness how like the production of content has changed. All of a sudden, the elite is in the minority, and the audience actually is deciding what they read with every like, with every retweet they're doing. So all of a sudden, like everyone within this room has become an editor, just by clicking yes, I like it, by sharing and so on. So actually what we're witnessing, and this was like the early beginning of like the hopes that were attached to the internet, that this is a very liberating kind of a way that everyone here becomes their own like gatekeeper. We could decide what is important in the world, and not longer just the editors-in-chiefs or the Murdochs and so on in this world. So we should all be very happy and cheerful and say hooray, like this was great. Right. So, but as often as in history, like the weapons that we were armed with, and in this case we're armed with this kind of a weapon, every one of us carries a weapon in his or her purse or like jacket. This is powerful stuff, because this changes a lot, because these weapons are connected, and the ultimate weapon is like the connection of what we're communicating with each other. So, and to give it like a little more, this is like how communication today looks like. Like, you know, like every one of us is interconnected with each other, and information finds its way, no matter if you cut here and there like a street. This is like how communication in the social web looks like, and that reminds us very much on like this. This was a picture I've taken in on Tahrir Square in Cairo several years ago. So there was this promise of like liberation, of like a new era for democracy, that we all are liberated by technology. But this was only like the first step of the technology evolving, because it is too tempting to have a weapon in the hands of the people to turn that weapon actually against you. So what am I talking about here? Soon, very soon, the nations, especially the suppressing nations, became aware of what was going on, like in Cairo, can hit us the very next day. So all the states were fearful of the people to develop too much independence, so they used the very technology not to inform the people, but to control the people. And I'm not talking here just about states like China, which is actually right now in the process of like cutting deals with big technology firms, and all Silicon Valley actually surrenders to China these days. If you read the papers closely, they all build into their censorship model in order to get the market and the people to sell their products to. But I'm not talking about like suppressing states like China or Turkey. We've seen that lately, that form of censorship that's going on there. I'm talking also about our Western civilization and our Western states. We all are aware of what Edward Snowden has revealed to us. By the way, I like this very much. Like here we see a document from the NSA files, and look what the NSA wrote here. Here we actually interfered between Google and the rest of the world, and that's where we're gonna like spy on. So with a little smiley here, like that very much. So anyways, I was wondering what can be done with the data and what's actually happening. And again, let us remind us, this is not just Putin. This is not just China. This is also us. So one day I boarded a plane and I went to Utah because I was interested in where is all the data that they're gonna like fetch. Where is it gonna be stored? And the NSA has built a beautiful like server in the middle of nowhere in Utah. It's about an hour drive from Salt Lake City, like really in the desert, in the open field. It's not that open, and I let me show you like some footage that I brought you to.
As far as I understand, it's a data storage facility. The NSA facility, the main headquarters back east, they send them all their information to here. It's like that one's the central headquarters, and there are several that are throughout the country, but this is the main data facility where they store all their information. So, and they have it right there next to the military base, Camp Williams. All those hills and everything are owned by Camp Williams, and so they're just kind of inside of Camp Williams, protection. Since the NSA facility has kind of been up and running, there's been a lot more activity. Certain times of the night, I'll always hear something, a chopper that goes over, and it's like at a weird hour of the night, but it's every night for the past couple of months, and so, I don't know what that's about, but that's irregular, and it's, you know, it's a newer development, so I don't know what they're doing with that.
So if you want to read more about where all your phone calls or WhatsApp messages are stored, check out my blog. So what I'm trying to say is, like, data is tempting. And wherever there's data, like, there are forces that want to possess these informations. And we're talking about states, but we're also talking about corporations. And we're gonna talk, I'm sure, a lot about corporations like Facebook, like, later on, so I don't wanna go too much into that. But we're also talking about individuals, right? So there is, you know, like, we're beyond a world that consists only from like, out of states and statesmen. We also talk about individuals, and we must talk about the elephant in the room, Mr. Trump. And I'm not talking about Mr. Trump as the president of the United States. I'm not talking about him like as being part of a party anymore. He became his own party. He's not attached to a party. He is independent, so to speak, and by his own means became, like, he hijacked both the party and the nation. And he could do that because he knew the right people to call, and Hannes already talked about Cambridge Analytica and the power that these kind of data analysts possess, which brings us to a new form of cooperation, public-private partnership. And this is intriguing because public-private partnership means that, you know, like, our data does not need to be stored at the NSA anymore, or at, I don't know, the Bundesnachrichtendienst. No, they just need a backdoor on the Google servers, Facebook servers, and so on. And here's the intriguing thing. You don't need public-private partnership anymore between, like, the government and private corporations. You can take any government and combine it, let's say, with an individual. And that individual becomes very powerful. So to break it down a little bit, we all know that there's been something going on within the campaign of Trump that needs to be more investigated. I don't want to go too deep into that because I think we're all sick and tired of what we've learned already. But here's something that I think we must address, and this is like how technology and data can change democracies. And I think we should hear it from somebody who actually has had to learn quite a lot about that throughout the last several months. This is her first appearance into to a conference, her first time that she actually talked about what happened to her. Let's hear it from Hillary Clinton herself.
Was the first time that you had the tech revolution really weaponized politically. Before, it was a way to reach voters, you know, collect fundraising, do things that would help the candidate who was behind the messaging. That changed this time. What we thought we were doing, here's the arena we were playing in, was going to like Obama 3.0, you know, better targeting, better messaging, and the ability to both turn out our voters as we identified them and to communicate more broadly with voters. Here's what the other side was doing, and they were in a different arena. Through content farms, through an enormous investment in falsehoods, fake news, call it what you will.
How about lies?
Lies are really, that's a good word too. The other side was using content that was just flat out false and delivering it in a very personalized way. You know, both sort of above the radar screen and below. And I, you know, look, I'm not a text expert by any stretch of the imagination. That really influenced the information that people were relying on. And there have been some studies done since the election that if you look, let's pick Facebook, if you look at Facebook, the vast majority of the news items posted were fake. They were connected to, as we now know, the 1,000 Russian agents who were involved in delivering those messages. They were connected to the bots that are just out of control. We see now this new information about Trump's Twitter account being populated by millions of bots. And it was such a new experience. I understand why people on their Facebook pages would think, oh, Hillary Clinton did that. I did not know that. Well, that's going to affect my opinion about her.
The very next morning when Trump was elected, I had coincidentally a meeting at the Washington Post. I've never seen so many shocked faces in my entire professional life. Which was interesting because before I visited Washington, I was at the West Coast. I was at the headquarters of Google, and at Google in Mountain View, California, people were not that surprised about the win of Donald Trump. It's funny to remember. I met a guy from Google Trends, and he said he would not be too sure about Hillary Clinton to win, and he explained it to me here in the soundbite.
Yeah, you're never as honest as you are with your search engine, and this isn't about, when you search, you're not expressing publicly your position on something, you're really trying to find out more about something, and that's what's unique about the data that we have. I think every other kind of social media data source is really just a list of the ways that people publicly express themselves. But this is different. This is an insight into what we really genuinely care about and what we want to find out more about and what we're worried about as well. I think what's really changed, if you compare 2016 to 2012, is the ability to see what's happening in real time. The fact that so many of us are online all the time, and now we can see in Google Trends data what was happening 2 or 3 minutes ago, how the reaction comes. Somebody will say something, and immediately people will go online to find out what they were talking about and whether what they said was true. And so we're seeing that, and the ability of us to measure that is a new thing. We've never had an election before, and I think that gives us a real insight into kind of, America's brain, right? We can look inside America's brain and see what people really care about at any moment.
Let me write that out to you again. It's fascinating, and I wanted to know how our brain actually looks on Google, or vice versa. And so every one of you can download their information from Google, or parts of it. I'm sure they don't provide you everything, but let's have a look onto our data. This is the data that Google has collected on me over the past 4 years. And if we run it down a little bit, you see every query, every search that I've done throughout the past 4 years. And not only that, we can also see when did I search, where did I search, what were the words, what was the machine that I used, and so on and so on. I could have that rolling like the Matrix for over 20 minutes, and we still haven't seen all the information that Google has on me collected over 4 years. And here's the intriguing part, because in the EU we're always saying okay, if we anonymize my name, if we detach it from my name, so anybody could have searched for this kind of stuff. People, don't let yourself being fooled by lobbyists. Each and every one of us has a certain pattern how to look for things, how to, the words that we're using, the phrases, even the typos that we're making. And the search in itself becomes a fingerprint. So I don't even have to attach my name anymore to my computer. Google knows that is me, no matter if I'm Googling from Reykjavik or from Hamburg, for that matter. So that becomes very, very clear, and that's also something that we should address. Why am I stating this? Because in the discussion over like the immigration law that Trump tried to pass, like in the shadows of it, a very important law has been passed through Congress, which allows private companies to sell our data. Like everything that you do online, if you like your browser history, everything is there to be sold. And this law just passed at the end of March this very year. And nobody took notice of that, right? Because we're all too, like, who was fired by Trump yesterday makes the headlines. But things like that actually have a much deeper and bigger impact on all our lives. So as Hannes mentioned, I've been part in a documentary that actually tried to make visible what happens behind our beautiful screens, and I have a look, like write down do not track doc.com and try it for yourself. I'll give you a brief example of what you can do. You can actually like type in like the website that you like to get your news from. Like I just put on that focus now, just to shock you. And you see all the trackers that are actually reading you while you are reading the website, right? But that's, of course, not all, because we have to deal with the internet. So let's bring in another news site like Süddeutsche Zeitung, okay? So if I now go to süddeutsche.de, see what happens. Like Süddeutsche uses 18 trackers and they interchange, so Focus and Süddeutsche benefit from each other, and most of all, of course, like those red dots in between, because they follow you wherever you go online. So, and this becomes a very, very detailed image of yourself. And you know, people were always like saying, you know, Google knows you better than you know yourself. Maybe, at one point. It gets even juicier. Who here in the room has one of these? Okay, one. Okay. Smart speakers. By the end of the year, Apple also jumps into that game. Smart speakers are devices that you put in your house and you can communicate with them. They're, you know, like tell you what the weather is or who won the soccer game and so. So what they are basically doing is they're listening into your private home 24/7. 24/7. And just to give you a brief like feeling for what it means to like have your data running through the internet onto servers. I've downloaded a few samples of this very morning. I did that at the airport just to demonstrate to you what it means to have that data all of a sudden from your private home flooding the webs. And this is like downloaded from a cloud that is sitting somewhere in Seattle, or I don't know where Amazon has its cloud. Anyways, so listen to this. Disclosure, it's my son. He loves to talk to Alexa.
Alexa, what is gonna be the weather tomorrow when you read? Alexa, play Star Wars. Alexa, are you okay?
So the machinery itself becomes like kind of a like meshes like into our private life, and my 6-year-old son actually talks to the machine as if it would be just another human being, right? Are you okay? When she didn't answer. But make no mistake, this data is stored on a server, and it can narrow down our voices. It can distinguish between me and my son by now. It learns my voice. And yeah, and this is only the beginning. We're carrying sensors with us, like an Apple Watch. Who has an Apple Watch? There are only there are 4 sensors built into this gadget. 4 sensors only, like that read your pulse, only to read your pulse. 4 sensors. A smartphone like this possesses at least 10 sensors, and you have them with you all day long. Now that generates a lot of data. And we're not talking about the Google search data anymore. You produce data and you don't even know about it. You don't even have to use a terminal. You don't even have to speak to something. You produce data while you're sitting here. Like Google knows that we're all sitting here together because it has the data of us being all at the same venue. So we're producing more and more data. And you don't have to do anything, like the data will be produced. You don't even have to be on Facebook. You don't have to be on Google. The data, you leave a lot of traces and a lot of data points with you without even knowing. So, which brings me to my final question that I want to hand over to the forum. Who do you think is creepier? Who do you think is more dangerous? Who do you think is the real threat when it comes to abusing data? Is it the government? Is it a state? Or are these private corporations? And I could not think of anybody better to address this question to this young man. Asked that question last year on a conference.
On the long run, who do you think is a bigger threat to our privacy? Is it the FBI? Is it Facebook? Is it Google or the government?
So there is a different category of powers that are available to these different sets of actors. And there are different challenges depending on the gravity of impacts that these actors can assert through their use of these capabilities. For example, I mean, Facebook, they can spy on you, they can change your ad preferences, they can sell and share information about you to other groups, which is quite dangerous, especially if they begin sharing it with more and more governments with fewer and fewer restrictions, which we have seen in many cases. Almost every major technology provider of services online today stores analytics data when you logged in, what you looked at, who your friends lists are and everything like that. In many cases, your private messages. And they'll hand these to any government as long as they can stamp a court order. Now, we want them to be responsive to court orders in many cases, of course. This is proper and appropriate in many contexts because we need it for legitimate criminal investigations that are truly effective. However, there are many countries in the world that have courts. North Korea has courts, Syria has courts, Iran has courts, Russia has courts, China has courts, France, Germany, Latin America, any country, any region that you look at, they can all do the same thing, but they all have different standards. Now, what Facebook can't do is put you in prison directly. They can't say, you violated our terms of service, so we're going to aim a missile at you, at least yet. But this is, I would say, the category difference that makes abuse of these powers by governmental actors much more dangerous. But abuse by corporate actors, I would argue, is much more common. So we're making a category error. There's a false dichotomy when we try to choose between which of these is the greater threat. Instead, we should be focusing on policing both and ultimately looking for ways that we can enforce our rights through new means, such as science, technology, that are not reliant on trust, but instead we let math do the work for us.
So, and with that, I want to hand the microphone back to Hannes. Thank you very much.
All right, Antonio, thank you, Richard, for this wonderful introduction coming from politics into the role of personal data. And so we've been talking about cybernetic feedback loops. So part one of the loop is getting information, and Richard has been talking about the role of sensors and machines. And now part 2 in a feedback loop is how to inject information back into the system. And there's a great method called targeting developed by companies in order to better adjust the information they're sending to the individual's preferences that have been observed. And I think the best person to explain this is here with us right now. Antonio Martínez helped develop Facebook's ad targeting system and will be giving us some explanations and insight into this. And here you go, Antonio, are you ready? All set?
Absolutely ready. All right, so why should you all be sitting here patiently listening to me? So a quick little CV, just so you know who I am. So I was the founder of this company, which you've never heard of, called AgRock, that was bought by this company that you've probably heard of, although perhaps for not very much longer. And then I eventually ended up working for this company, which you've certainly heard of, a year before the IPO. And my official title there was Product Manager for Ads Targeting. And if you don't know what ads targeting means, Hannes used the term earlier, my goal in this talk is so that you actually understand what it means by the end of this talk. So I'm going to explain to you the basics of ads targeting and how Facebook, helps pay for the internet in 25 minutes, more or less, hopefully, okay? But what did I really do when I was there? These are all retargeted ads, right? Let me ask you something. Everyone here is on Facebook, right? And those who say no, you're all lying, probably, because I've seen the usage dashboards. You're all on Facebook. Or at least the 3/4 of every internet user in a mature market is on Facebook, right? So, when you go search the internet and you go shop for a pair of shoes, or maybe you even buy something in a physical store, and then it seems like Facebook reacts to that and shows you ads based on things you've done outside of Facebook? Who's had this experience out of curiosity? Everyone, right? Okay, so believe it or not, I actually created that. I'm actually I created the first versions of what is used by Facebook to track all of you, actually online. Believe it or not. I actually pitched that to Zuck in the summer of 2012. Facebook did nothing like that at all. Facebook was very primitive ad system, actually, until the IPO, when there was suddenly a lot of pressure to make a lot of money really quick. And Facebook at the time was such a startup that even some mid-level product manager like me could raise a hand and say, look, we should do this weird, cool thing, and go do it, and a month later we had shipped it, right? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works. And then the other thing I did is I wrote this book, and this is not just a total plug for the book, although it kind of sort of is, because I am a marketer. But if you're actually interested by anything that I have to say, the second half of my book actually has it in way more detail. And the reason I wrote the book is precisely so that people can have informed conversations about how Facebook helps pay for the internet, right? Because a lot of the discussion around Facebook, in my opinion, is very inaccurate. And throughout this entire conversation, I hope not only to put information in your heads, but also take bad information out of your heads. Because I can almost guarantee you that in many ways you're thinking about Facebook kind of the wrong way. By wrong, I don't mean morally wrong, I mean just inaccurate, like not actually how it works, okay? So let's get going. Richard mentioned the elephant in the room, which is Trump, right? And the saying in English, when the shit hits the fan, right? Which, if you picture it, it more or less expresses the sentiment of the expression is when everything just blows up, right? And so, 2 days after the election, everyone was accusing Facebook of having helped elect Trump. And Zuck went up and said something that I thought was monstrously stupid. And as we'll see, my last slide is him changing, like literally 3 days later, his statement, saying that, there's no way that Facebook could have elected Trump. And either it was a lie in the sense that he was actually lying through his teeth, or he still doesn't really know how the Facebook ad system works, which wouldn't surprise me, because in 2012 he didn't know how it worked either. He doesn't care about money at all. Sheryl does basically everything with ads. He doesn't care about ads. It's funny, when he said that, I give interviews and people were asking me, like, is it possible that Facebook actually did it? And my answer was, of course Facebook could throw the election. In fact, I'll tell you how I know this. I was the guy who managed ads targeting, again, all the data targeting, during the last election in 2012, right? So I know very well, actually, how Facebook gets used by politicians to market itself. In case you don't know what this is, I'm guessing you guys have a general election, right, in a few days or like a week or something, right? Like Merkel, is she gonna, be as long as Helmut Kohl, whatever, right? If you had an election in the United States and you open Facebook, you'd see one of these announcements, right? As a public service, Facebook actually reminds you when an election is and actually tells you where to go vote and actually tells you who the candidates are, right? Because it's all part of the patriotic American democratic thing, right? That little button you see up there, I voted, if you've ever been to the US during election day, they hand those out at the polls, and everyone walks out with a little I voted thing, right? So this is the Facebook version of the I voted sticker, right? And it's supposed to be this universally good thing, right? But I mean, Richard used the word weaponize, right? So you could weaponize this very easily. How would you do it? How would Facebook throw the election, right? And we were aware, just to be clear, if there's journalists in the room, Facebook never did this, never seriously discussed doing this, but we did joke about it. I would joke about it, basically. How do we do it? It'd be very easy, actually, right? If you know anything about the American electoral system, and it always amazes me how much Europeans tend to follow American politics, way more than the reverse, that's for sure. If you know anything about American politics, right, you know that it all comes down to swing states, right? Everyone knows what a swing state is, right, more or less, given the electoral system, right? Well, that's actually an oversimplification, because it's not just swing states, it's swing counties inside swing states, right? So what this is, and shit, the color just completely screws it up, but the red counties, which is most of them, okay, by the way, are the counties that switched from Democrat to Trump in 2016, okay? So these are the ones that flipped. These are the counties that won the election for Trump, effectively, right? And look how many counties there are, there's almost none. And even this is deceptive. These are mostly rural counties, right? And so the number of people that actually decide an American election is very small, right? Like, most Americans' votes actually don't count in the presidential election. Everyone in California can basically not show up and vote. It doesn't matter what they do, actually, right? It's only the people in these key counties. So what would you do? What would you do? Well, you'd show that reminder to go vote selectively only in the red counties and not the blue ones. Get out Trump's vote, don't get out Hillary's vote, and that's it. You'd throw the election, right? And what we could do is, and again, this was the joke, well, you know, instead of all this advertising and back and forth, and why don't we just, you know, auction off the election? We just throw the election and then just sell it to whoever's the higher bidder, right? So there's two arguments against that, right? I told you I was bad cop, right? So there's two arguments against that. One is, obviously, it's completely illegal. Two, actually would suck, because it means advertisers would spend less money on the platform, right? Which is why Facebook ultimately would never do it, right? Because it's actually a cheaper way of selling the election than just having advertising, right? So anyhow, that's why, you know, having made this joke, that's why Zuck's statement is completely ridiculous. The thought that Facebook couldn't have thrown an election is absurd. In fact, he may not know this, maybe, but Facebook has a sales force with hundreds of people who every 2 years just try to convince every politician that Facebook can give them the election, right? They literally have a sales force. And by the way, it's divided by party. There's Republican and Democratic sales, and they never talk to each other because no one trusts each other in politics, right? And so, you know, in the US, politics is big business. There's about $1 billion in digital media spend in the US, which isn't that big compared to the 60 billion of the total market, but it's a big enough bucket of cash that when they show up, you know, Facebook pays attention, right? And so this is a quote from one of my favorite American humorists. You know, when buying and selling are legislated, the first thing bought and sold are legislators, right? Obviously, right? And so in the US, believe it or not, political spending is actually protected free speech, according to the Supreme Court. And so you can actually fund candidates, and that's protected free speech in the United States, right? Which I'm sure everyone here finds mystifying and horrifying, just like our gun laws, but there it is, right in the Constitution, Amendment number 1, that's how it works, right? So let's talk about how, aside from my crazy plot to take over the American government through voting reminders, let's talk about how targeting actually works in ads, which is probably not how you're thinking at all. This is how Facebook makes money off of you and the phones that you've all got in your pockets right now, okay? So first thing, so this is, Jesus, I have to really lean back, I can't see shit. Hold on. So this is, okay, so there's 3 classes of data, right, that go into deciding what ad you see. And let's bust the first myth that you have about Facebook. Who here has at some point thought or posted or whined, God, why is Facebook showing me this shitty, stupid ad, right? Who has thought that or been like asked that question? Everybody, right? Okay, so there's a couple problems with that. For starters, either the ad is crappy or it's creepy, right? It's either crappy or creepy. It's never in between, right? It's never just creepy enough, right, to be like accurate, but not so much that you feel weirded out by it, right? So it's either always crappy or creepy, right? But the second error with that analysis is Facebook actually isn't showing you anything, right? Here's the flaw, right? Ads are simply a paid messaging system in which the addressing is this data that we're about to talk about, right? Facebook actually isn't showing you anything. By and large, Facebook doesn't actually affect what ads you see very much at all, as a matter of fact. And it's funny because, and I always ask myself, why do people get this so wrong, right? When you get a spam email message, for example, right, for whatever, do you sit there and say, Google, why did you show me this commercial email? No, of course you don't, right? When you get, maybe in Germany it's not legal, but in the US you get marketing calls on your phone trying to sell you something. Do you say, damn it, T-Mobile, why are you showing me marketing ads. Of course not, right? Because you understand that it's a messaging system, because you all make phone calls and send emails. But most of you, hopefully, don't actually create ads for a living, so you don't understand that it's a paid messaging system. But it is, and that's one of the things I think, hopefully, maybe you get out of your head a little bit when you think about, how Facebook makes money off of you. Okay, so let's get to the actual data. The first class of data is data that Facebook knows about you and then exposes to advertisers through the targeting system. These are the levers that advertisers have, and I'll show you the actual interface, like the actual levers themselves in a second, of how they actually target you. And what are those levers? So the first one is likes and interest targeting, right? Which is like your actual likes plus semantic tagging. What that means is a lot of your user data, your posts, conversations, whatever, get tagged. And what that means is if you're talking about football or Formula One, then you might be put in the football or Formula One cluster. Frankly, I spent the first year at Facebook. It was a project called. I'm also a Spanish citizen, so it was called Project Chorizo, which chorizo, if you know, is like a sausage, right? And so we're basically sucking in every user action that you produce on Facebook and seeing if it improved the targeting system. And the reality is, almost nothing actually improved it, which brings me to my second fallacy that you probably all have that I think you should remove from your heads if you want to talk seriously about Facebook. Here's another flaw that everyone has. You entrust so much to Facebook, right? And you're wary about it, and you understandably are wary about it, right? I mean, conversations with your girlfriends, with your parents, pictures of your birthdays, your entire social life is on there, and you should be, a little wary about it. But here's the reality, right? The data that you most want to protect, that you're most private about, in fact, almost certainly is the data that's least valuable to Facebook or to advertisers. I'll express it with a slightly salty metaphor. Just because there's a nude photo of you on the internet doesn't mean anyone would actually pay money to see it, right? That's the reality of it, right? Like your most private stuff, I mean, sorry to say it, nobody get offended, but frankly has almost zero value from the commercial point of view. So even assuming evil behavior on the part of Facebook, they don't care, right? And so, but let's see what they do care about. So likes and interests, they sort of care about. There's a saying in ads, just because it doesn't work doesn't mean you can't sell it, right? And so even if likes targeting really doesn't work by and large, it doesn't matter. A lot of targeting is just a license to spend money. The agency wants to justify its spend to the advertiser, and that's one way of saying, hey, we targeted people who like Formula One, even though you're not gonna go and see a Formula One race. But anyhow, that's one thing. Age and gender, very important for various reasons. Facebook has very good data there. Geography, geo, very good. Why does Facebook have very good geo data? Because you're all broadcasting your location to Facebook right now as we speak. The little object in your pocket is actually tracking you, and Facebook uses that data to see where you are, right? In the political context, that matters a lot, right? Because where you vote is important to the candidate. Also, there's a lot of census data that goes with that. Like, in Germany, it may not be legal, but in the US, there's census data compiled around average income, education, ethnic makeup, everything that matters around zip code. And so it's a proxy for all that data. And then there's some other modeled interest stuff that Facebook doesn't actually have the data, but it works with other companies to generate. So, okay, enough talking. What does this actually look like? So this is actually taken, like if you go to Facebook right now and create an ad, you'll see this in the drop down to create an ad. So this is, I can't quite see it. So this is the ethnic targeting, which is illegal in the EU, but it's legal in the United States, in which Facebook figures out who's Hispanic, who's Asian, who's black, whatever, and you can target ads based on that. This is, I can't quite see it. Oh shit, you're right, idiot. Sorry, I felt like I was like being like part of the phenomenon by watch. Anyhow, so new image, new vehicle shoppers, for example, like who's in market for a car is a massive thing. Like car companies will pay a fortune for that. Interests, right? That comes from likes and interests. And then likely to engage with political content, conservative, liberal, moderate, etc. Again, very relevant for political targeting, right? So this is some of the data. This is your data that Facebook exposes. Again, it's not giving it away, but it exposes it through an interface so an advertiser can go in and choose to address a certain segment, right? This is how it works. This is literally like, this is what you'd be doing if you were running Facebook ads, okay? So there's a second class of data, which is what advertisers know about you, right? Separately from Facebook. Like Facebook's not really in the picture, but they choose to express that data on Facebook, right? And what's that? Well, I mean, Richard mentioned some of that. Your browsing history, for example. Everywhere you go, you're being tracked. Your online purchasing history, Amazon or whatever your local online retailer is here, I don't even know. In the US, it may not be legal in Germany, but your in-store purchasing history, if you use loyalty cards, they get discounts at, I don't know, Aldi's or your version of Walmart or Safeway, that all gets tracked, by the way. And there's a reason why you're getting a discount. It's not really free. And then huge amounts of census and population data. And then you might be asking, well, but how does that get to Facebook? Very good question, okay? The process is actually called data onboarding. I mean, Facebook calls it custom audiences. We actually came up with that name. But the general name, if you want to Google it, it's called data onboarding. And the key thing here, what I'm trying to capture in this graphic, and that, again, Richard sort of hinted at, there's so much of your data that is actually keyed around things like your email. When you sign up with an email for a newsletter or a newspaper or an online dating site, for example, online dating sites don't just make money by charging a subscription, they sell that email and that data as well. You're at my old address. Nobody sent me a letter. Okay, that's the old address. My address, which in the US, there's so much advertising in the mail, and we didn't invent this tracking shit in the internet. Like direct mail has been doing this for decades. They've been tracking every American family, every American household in the United States. It's known how many members there are, what age, their income level, their education level, how they consume, that's all gets tracked, right? And that all gets joined to the Facebook experience, right? So what advertisers do is, look, I know that you bought this thing at Aldi's or Walmart or whatever. I just want to find you on Facebook. And that's what Facebook does. You basically take all that data, it goes through Facebook, and it produces an online experience, right? Getting back to my point about you're worried about data that you shouldn't be worried about, here's a piece of data that actually is valuable that, I mean, you can choose to worry about it or not. The key thing, why Facebook is worth $400 billion and is, I think, the 4th or 5th most valuable public company in the world right now, the long-term reason for that is because Facebook has become the one single immutable, meaning unchanging, ID for humanity on the internet, wherever it might be. What's the first thing you do when you buy a smartphone? You install Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp, and you log in, right? Right? So that device ID gets sucked in by Facebook, and then they know who the real you is, like the Antonio Garcia who's married to so-and-so and just checked in there. They know that that's attached to that device. And so they know basically every media experience you have, Facebook knows where that is and can either serve you ads there or track what ads you saw there and what you did later down what's called the conversion funnel when you go and buy stuff, right? So this is the outside data being used on Facebook side of things, okay? And then the last thing is the stuff that you're worried about that actually is the least important thing in this picture, which is what Facebook knows about you and then uses it itself, right? And this is not what you're thinking. Things like your entire click history, right? Everyone claims, oh, I don't click on ads, and yet somehow Facebook makes $24 billion a year. Oh, where did that come from? You actually do click on ads, right? And so Facebook knows that entire history on every device you've ever touched, and then uses that to optimize ads. And so the total picture we've got here, okay, the final picture here, is that on the bottom we have targeting, right? So that's Facebook data used by others, right? That's the team, that's the product I used to build and run. And then we've got data onboarding, outside data, right? That is brought to Facebook. And then the final, frankly, least important part is what's called optimization, which is Facebook using its own data, sort of tweak that and try to get out an extra 5 or 10% of revenue from data that it has, okay? So getting back to my metaphor about how this is a messaging system, okay? So the people in the lower boxes, right? That's how they address you. The same way you write an email or you make a phone call. These people are addressing you with that data that they have. That's kind of how it works. And let me bust another myth while we're there. I'm sure everyone has read the piece. Every tech journalist in the world, once a year, has to write the piece that's called "How is Facebook selling your data? Everyone freak out," right? Like everyone always writes this piece, particularly in Germany, where everyone is freaked out about data and privacy for historical reasons, et cetera, right? So it's funny because everyone says Facebook sells your data. Facebook actually does not sell your data. It does not. Facebook is the sink of data that will never leave. The moment you write user data to Facebook, Facebook will never let that leave ever. I mean, why would it? It would be suicidal to do that. Facebook doesn't sell your data. It actually buys your data, right? Because think of it, Facebook doesn't have the data it wants. It wants to know what you bought at the grocery store. It wants to know what you bought at Amazon. It wants to know what car you drive. It wants to know, are you getting married? It wants to know, are you traveling to the United States? And it doesn't know any of those things, right? But it wants to know them. So what it has to do is produce products and experiences and tools and measurement tools that convince advertisers to give Facebook that data. That's this lower box, the data onboarding. So Facebook doesn't sell your data, it buys your data by creating products that convince people who are very private with their data. Amazon does not want to give up its conversion data or its sales data to give it to Facebook instead, right? That's really how ads targeting works, right? This is the reality of it, okay? Like unfiltered, unvarnished, not trying to sell you anything. I don't care about Facebook anymore. I read a whole book, kind of partially criticizing them. This is the reality, okay? So was that more or less understandable, or was that just like completely over everybody's heads? Yeah? Hannes, what do you think? Where's Hannes? More or less? Yeah? Okay. How much time do I have? Let's see. So, so far I've woven this story, this very cynical Machiavellian story about how you can buy political position and you can buy influence and all the rest of it. But some of you might ask, and correctly, well, but hold on. Trump actually didn't raise that much money. In fact, Hillary actually outraised them 2-1. Hillary actually had twice as much money as Donald did. In fact, Donald didn't even spend that much money on media, in fact. He did spend some, like it's not zero, like Hannes has reported on his whole story, like that's true, but I don't think that's why he won necessarily, right? Because here's here I'm quoting myself, by the way, which I know is very immodest, but Americans aren't exactly known for humility, right? So, marketing is like sex. Only losers pay for it, right? And it's true, right? If you have to pay for to get a message out, it means that message kind of sucks, right? Like you're literally imposing it on somebody, right? That's like, does Trump have to pay for media marketing? Let's look at this week's covers in magazines, right? Which I think this week is a unique week. Okay, ready? Is everyone gonna take a picture of the quote? I see people take a quote. All right, ready? So this is this week's Economist, this week's Der Spiegel, and this week's New Yorker. When's the last time you actually saw the same topic on the 3 leading weekly magazines in the world, using the exact same iconography around the exact same theme? When's the last time you saw that? I can't recall, right, the last time, right? So Trump, for as much as we might hate him or whatever, is still a master at getting earned media. In fact, estimates say that he got anywhere between $2 to $5 billion in earned media throughout the course of the entire election, right? He didn't spend a dime, right? He just had to tweet. And we had to react, right? That's the key thing, right? So how does this work, right? Like, now that we've covered the ads targeting, I did my job. Hannah said explain ads targeting. I've explained ads targeting. Now I'm going to have a little bit of an opinion about where we're headed with this, okay? So here's a personal confession. Privacy is dead, right? So I don't care. I'll share personal stories with you. And Hannes probably doesn't even know this. My first paid job was actually in journalism. I was an intern at the Miami Herald. I was raised in Miami, Florida. And when I was 17, a kid, I worked in a newspaper. This pre-internet days. We didn't even have email, I think, right? And you would have what's called an editorial meeting, right? And this is where very smart, educated people with a sense of responsibility and very serious and sober terms decide which stories get published on the front page of a newspaper, right? But who decides what actually gets read now? Well, this guy does, actually, right? Facebook's newsfeed algorithm has become the front page editor to most media, as a matter of fact. If Pew Research, which is an American think tank, has shown that over 50% of Americans get most of their news or find their news through Facebook. And if you talk to publishers, and they don't publish this because it's horribly embarrassing, anywhere from 30 to 60% of their actual inbound traffic comes from Facebook, right? But what they put on the front page doesn't even matter anymore. Like, it's irrelevant, actually. It's how well it does on Facebook. That's the reality of that. And you might be asking, like, is this accidental? Was this planned? I'll quote myself again, very immodest. But this is from a page in my book. When you join Facebook, by the way, it's like joining a cult. And I'm absolutely serious about that. And in the baptism in that cult, it's called onboarding, in which the leading members of the company come and preach to you the philosophy of Facebook. And one of the things, this is a passage from Chaos Monkeys. Chris Cox, who's head of product and still is head of product, came out and said, what's Facebook? Someone said, social network. He's like, no. Facebook is the New York Times of you. It's channel you. It's your personalized newspaper experience. It's the prism through which you see the world, and this, very well-crafted spiel. And this was in 2011. And at the time, it seemed a little arrogant, a little, that's a little bit out there. But then, well, now we have Trump, right? And maybe, indeed, it is the case that Facebook defines the reality that we see. And so I'm going to ask a question and end this on a slightly down note, maybe not so down. But, can democracy actually survive Facebook? It's a real question, and I'm not asking that rhetorically, and as proof, I'm showing you this. So believe it or not, 2 days ago, I had a beard out to here and hair out to here, because I'd spent 2 months building this cabin in the woods, my little hideaway getaway, in case, like, literally, democracy ends in the United States. In case you think I'm crazy, I'm actually not the only one. This, which is called prepping in English, is actually very popular among the Silicon Valley set. A lot of my friends actually have hideaways all over California, all over Washington, in case the American experiment, 241 years of democracy, finally ends, right? And it's a good question. I'm not sure that democracy can survive Facebook. One positive, and I'll end here in case someone actually yanks me off the thing. This is an American story, so it has to have a happy ending, okay? So Mark, after that ridiculous thing about Facebook not impacting, 3 days later said, okay, look, we're taking a different tack. We're actually going to start filtering fake news. We're going to use third-party sources to actually authorize content, et cetera, which, I mean, if you know anything about Facebook, this should be like a bomb going off. Facebook has always claimed, look, we're not a content company, we're not a media company, we're a tech company, right? We do math, we write code, that's it. We take no editorial responsibility. Post-Trump, post-Brexit, post-everything, the world is just not going to let Zuck get away with that, right? And so it's ironic though, right? We worry about the power that Facebook has over us, and as a result, we're asking them to actually assume more power, right? Because in the past, Facebook filtered almost nothing, literally almost nothing, right? But now we're actually asking them to step in and play an editorial function in the hopes that democracy can survive. Because the reality is that now, in a democracy, every citizen has a right to an opinion, And now every citizen has a right to their own reality, right? To their own truths, to their own facts. And the reality is you can't run a democracy in which citizens don't actually have a common set of facts they can even have a conversation around, right? And so hopefully, Facebook can make it such that we can actually have common conversations. Because right now, I mean, coming from the United States, I'm telling you, I've never seen the country in this state of complete political polarization. It's insane. So anyway, thanks. Thanks.
All right, let's see how the tech is going with our friend Paul Hilder. Thank you, Antonio.
Yeah, sure.
That was excellent. So some of you, those of you who are interested in getting a little more details about Antonio's life, there's not only his book, which I highly recommend, but there's also a very recent BBC Two documentary called The Secrets of Silicon Valley, where you can see Antonio shooting a lot with his guns in his retreat, just in case democracy doesn't work out so fine in the future. I'm more of an optimist in that regard than you are, but I've had a very long chat yesterday night with Paul still, because he arrived very late, and it was a very, very dark conversation, so I might change my attitude pretty soon, but still, Paul has the role of the sunny boy in this three-part panel, and because he's done a lot of campaigning, helping people to voice their opinions and to bring their opinions to a broader public and to powerful politicians, I think it's interesting what he has to say. He's been following the Bernie Sanders campaign, seen the team. He's been with Change.org and with Avaz in a leading position, and now Crowdpack is helping people to finance their political campaigns globally. So is there probably a question for Antonio, just to use the time in between? Is there somebody who wants to learn about Facebook's details? Richard?
Yeah.
How much did Facebook sue you until now?
No, none. So for nothing. So, the United States has many flaws, but free speech is near absolute. And so as long as it's truthful, and as long as as long as it's truth is always a defense. And so no matter what you say, it's not like...
Didn't you have to sign a non-disclosure?
But once anyone outside the company actually knows that, any partner or any competitor, or even hackers who've hacked the system and actually figured out something about Facebook, that leaves confidentiality. And it's, at least in the US, confidentiality is kind of like insider trading or kind of like hate speech. In the US, it's a very narrow set of things. And it's actually very difficult to get sued for confidentiality breach in the US. And also, aside from all that crap, no one understands social media better than Facebook. And I mean, my book was, briefly on the bestseller list. It would have been on there for 8 months had Facebook sued me, right? And they understood that, and so of course they didn't. And by the way, Facebook actually didn't come out that negatively. I'm actually very positive in some regards for Facebook, so yeah.
Okay.
Second question over there.
Could you maybe tell a little bit more about the law that Mr. Gutjahr mentioned in his first presentation, which passed in March, that makes selling data even more legal? It sounded like in your presentation that the onboarding system already uses all this data buying.
Yeah. So that's why I think that was not such a huge news event. So just the specifics of if I understand that bill, I'm not a huge expert on it, but basically it's ISPs, internet service providers, the guy who gives you internet, can sell your internet traffic. So literally the router logs of I connected to this IP address, they can in theory sell. The thing is, it doesn't actually give you that much more than having a pixel, like everything that he's showing on that thing, those are pixels firing on the site. It doesn't actually give you that much more data than that. It's just in the hands of somebody else. It's your ISP. So in terms of that data getting used, it's already getting used. It just changes who's using it, which I guess is not, that's a real thing, but it doesn't change the game in a huge, deep way. I mean, in my opinion. But yes, it does mean that somebody else can exploit that data. Sure. Yeah, definitely.
We're basically having the same technology already in Europe, every time like they place a cookie on your site and you're aware of those like banners that they are forced to put on your website now, and they say, we use cookies, do you agree?
Right.
And there's just one button, I agree. There's no, I don't agree, there's just one button, you can only agree. But with that, they have in a way like bypassed that ridiculous law from the EU.
Yeah.
Richard, that was something I'd be interested in. What do you, during your research on data markets in Europe and in the United States and the flows of personal data, what did you find the biggest differences just between US data markets, where you can buy mostly everything, even like voter rolls where people register whether they go voting with their full names and birth date, and the European Union? Like, what's, just to give people an idea about what are the big differences between where we are here in terms of what you can buy from data companies such as Axiom and Experian that Antonio was mentioning, and what you cannot buy here.
Like officially, we have actually good rulings and good rules and good legislation. But what is a good legislation for if nobody cares about it? And what Facebook actually is doing today in Europe is completely illegal. It's out of question. It's completely illegal what Facebook is doing in terms of our like data regulation laws. But you know, when you park your car like 10 minutes, and you get a ticket. You get a ticket and you have to pay for that ticket, and if you don't pay it, you actually go to prison, and the state, the government is enforcing that. With Facebook, they sell your data like to anywhere, although they're not allowed to do that without your consent, and nothing happens. So it's and I asked myself, why is that one thing, like, why is just small crimes are they put you in prison for, and big crimes such as like reading your brain literally is not enforced.
Okay, can I respond? Can I put my Facebook hat on for a second?
Please.
Can I put my Facebook? So, okay, yes, I mean, Facebook does all sorts of crazy stuff that's completely illegal in the EU. Yeah, without question, absolutely. But imagine, again, try to put yourselves in the shoes of Facebook. How could you possibly operate a company with 2 billion users subject to 180 national legal jurisdictions? It would be literally impossible. It would just be impossible. There's no way Facebook could do that, right?
Sure.
And I mean, that's the reality, right? And if the EU has that expectation, I mean, how do their startups make it, right? Like I've kicked around the startup scene a little bit in Europe, right? And it seems like European startups have a real problem scaling to all of Europe, right? And if you actually have to play ball with every legal regimen that you're in, I mean...
No, definitely, I'm on the same page with you. But please give the people like like honor your users by telling them what you're actually doing. But like we have face recognition, and once like the EU got really crazy about it, they shut it off. They did never shut it off. They don't let you see that they're still doing it.
Yeah, but does anyone really care? Like everyone cares about this shit until I give you a 20% off coupon at your favorite store.
Exactly.
And then nobody gives a shit. They're like sexting you photos of themselves naked. Like they don't care.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
But still, like, please give the people the decency of letting them know what you're doing with their data to begin with.
Okay, well, let's see. Who here has actually read the Facebook Terms of Service out of curiosity? Nobody, right? So it's all there. You can read it. It's like I actually helped craft the Terms of Service to do all this crazy shit. They had to be changed. And by the way, there was a vote. Facebook users voted on whether they wanted the new rules, and there was almost nobody voted because nobody cared. And so it passed, and so we changed it, which is why we could do all this stuff. But that's the thing. Like, no one really deeply cares about it, right? That's
yeah, but that is like a glitch in our in our psychology, because we do not feel anything yet. We do not feel. It's like radiology. It's like you don't see what you're doing to yourself until it's too late.
But what's the downside?
The downside is that your data will get used by states. Like who can you actually, like, nobody here in the room knows who in 10 years from now will run this country, and you didn't know that either. Right? So nobody can predict what the data that you produce today will be used against you one day.
Yeah.
It will decide about whether you get hired. It can decide whether you go to prison. It's all there. We just have to look deep enough into our very data, and we'll 100% will find something that we can actually use against you and threaten you with. And we have neighbors. We have Erdogan. We have other states, persons around us, and it's not that far away. It's not. It's like we said, it can never happen to us. Well, look at the United States right now.
I guess my last response to that would be Nick Denton, who's founder of Gawker, right? Admittedly, Gawker, whatever, right? But he said a very smart thing once, which is, the only sin in the future is going to be hypocrisy, right? I think privacy is going to be basically dead. I know it's heretical to say it here, but it's basically dead. And the only thing that will be held against you is a difference between what you publicly claim to have done in practice and what you privately actually do, right? To me, that's, I think, the last sin really left. And so, anyhow, in that world, I don't know that Facebook data collection is really the end of the world. But of course, I would say that, of course, obviously.
Who's got the guns? Okay, so now we have Paul Hilder here. Finally, I think we made it. And let's start out. Paul, this is your chocolate.
Great, yeah, I need to fuel myself. Fantastic. So this is a piece of street graffiti I saw in Miami when I was hanging out with my friends on the Bernie Sanders campaign. I do think we're in the middle of a political revolution, which was one of Bernie's phrases. I think that political revolution could go lots of different ways. Big data is a big part of it. Big organizing is also a part of it. And I just want to sort of zoom out from some of the technical stuff we've been talking about and talk a little bit more about the political context and how this stuff is landing and where it might go next. I am a consistent optimist of the will, for those of you who know Gramsci, which also means I'm a pessimist of the intellect, but I try to constructively move this stuff in the right direction. Risk of an electronic mafia. This is a phrase which I encountered in a book from, oh gosh, here we go, the connection to Hannes's internet is now very shady. Give me, what are we going to do?
Shall I do some translation?
Yeah. Can we connect this to my phone, which has 4G?
So, what?
So can you just get linked up?
Artist. Okay, diesmal haben wir ein Bandbreitenproblem. Das ist ein neues Problem in unserer kleinen Liste von Problemen.
So if you can just link it up to that.
Okay.
And I'll talk So I'm going to talk as we make this connection. So there's a guy, Hannes and I had this very interesting conversation last night. I had not realized he was going to talk about Project Cybersyn, which was the experiment in Chile in the early 1970s, which was visionary, far beyond its time. They were using telex machines. They were actually trying to enable more decentralized management of the economy rather than central planning, and to use the kind of central headquarters for information gathering, coordination, support of decentralized management. The guy who was the cyberneticist who built it with Allende's teams was a Brit called Stafford Beer. He wrote a book called Designing Freedom, which is based on some lectures he gave in Canada in 1973. I think that I've found in recent years this little diagram. Hang on, have we got it connected? Let's reconnect because we've got images now. Have we? Yeah, I think we're connected. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Does it work?
I think this is hopefully okay. You're only getting half the slide here, but I'm just going to work with it because we're short on time. I mean, I don't want to talk through all the details of this, I just want to touch on it, but the fact that in 1973, people who are thinking about more systematic, data-informed ways of organizing society also had these great concerns about the way in which data could be collected, not to empower individuals and communities, but to identify their susceptibilities and deliver to them their new lifestyle, politics, religion. So this is not a new challenge. In the age of mass media, there was a much more centralized way of delivering new worldviews to people. For instance, the Volksempfänger, which you will all be familiar with the story of here in Germany, the sort of centralized Nazi radio system. Although the mass media could also be used for more positive purposes, as it was by Roosevelt to drive the New Deal in America, and indeed the fight against Nazism. I think that there are similar positive and negative potentialities in our new and more networked and decentralized media environment. Obviously, you do have this stuff going on. I've talked to people in Cambridge Analytica, just as Hannes has, and to other practitioners, and I'm convinced that this stuff does work, and some of what they're doing is similar to what Antonio was talking about in terms of data onboarding, de-anonymizing, and building whole profiles of people. How good they're actually at it is not yet clear, but at least in principle, the possibilities are very powerful. And the guy who invested in them, Mercer, as some of you will know, is also the guy who has been most successful on Wall Street with these kinds of models based on sparse data to predict behavior in marketplaces. So take it seriously. Take these people seriously as well. Peter Thiel was one of the friends of the Trump network who helped in the early days, I believe, to connect them up with marketers. He's also one of the key investors in Facebook and has a very interesting worldview. This is one of the most striking quotes I've seen from him, where he talks about the single person who builds or propagates the machinery of freedom that makes the world safe for capitalism. And of course, this is one of the things that Steve Bannon said when he was chairing Trump's campaign. He now describes himself as unchained and ready to go nuclear, and I think is looking forward to getting back to his outsider role. But anyone who works in the political campaigning environment will tell you that Facebook is really the most powerful channel through which you can reach people online. You put together Facebook and face-to-face, and then you're really cooking. And then this is one of the things Antonio was referring to about the trends in fake news and some of the top stories. One of the things that happened in the middle there around that transition was that they transitioned away from a more editorial system to a more automated system, which was then more easily gamed by various different people. This is the map of the media landscape in the United States as it emerged over the course of the election, and you see the way in which Breitbart in particular came to play a central role in that. And there's a whole network of these kinds of outlets which played a critical role in developing a particular worldview which was self-reinforcing. And that network, just as much other aspects of modern marketplaces, is all enabled by various forms of commercial ad tech and data brokers, in particular the stuff that goes on in the middle of this chart, with things like Facebook actually, and also Demdex and now part of Adobe Marketing Cloud, Axiom, LiveRamp, various other companies. This is also, as far as I can make out, and I've talked to lots of people who are well informed on it, real. There's a long-standing tradition of what they call political technology in Russia, which will use any tactic possible. Some of my friends on the Bernie campaign told me there was a period early on where they were seeing a lot of money going into anti-Clinton money going into online advertising platforms like Outbrain and Taboola, promoting fake news, which they had nothing to do with and didn't know where it was coming from. This quote is from Vladislav Surkov, the preeminent political technologist, worked in the Kremlin for a long time, from a story he wrote called Without Sky, about something called nonlinear war, a sort of postmodern form of warfare. There are a lot of people who say that's kind of the world that we're starting to live through now. It's all very frightening. And then this happened. This happened in my own country. I know the person who ran this campaign, who's quoted here, as well as the person who ran the campaign on the other side. This guy was much smarter and more effective. As you'll see, the large majority of the impressions they served were through Facebook for the campaign. Differently to the Trump campaign, they were hammering a very small number of messages. They identified some wedge messages which appealed to a group of about 9 million people who they'd modeled with the help of some of the best data scientists in the UK. And pushed messages at them, which were frankly very misleading, but very effective in appealing to people's underlying frustrations, grievances, concerns, anxieties, and also in driving the media narrative. This famous fact, in inverted commas, which is not a fact, that Britain was sending 350 million a week to the European Union, achieved 78% recognition, and a very large plurality, almost half of people thinking it was true, many more than thought it was false. That's a quick canter through the way in which big data has been used by particular insurgent campaigns and powerful actors. A lot of you are familiar with the story, but a lot of it comes down to black boxes. People are building models for informational advantage. They're building them in workplaces, in marketplaces, in Wall Street. They're building them in Silicon Valley. They're building them in many other places. And there's a very important question about who benefits from information, which is one of the greatest sources of value in the 21st century, and whether getting the sort of scraps from the table is good enough. Now, I don't think there's any going back to the past, the 1990s or the 2000s. I do think that the status quo is broken. There is, when I first started working in this arena, Philip Gould, who was one of the architects of New Labour in the UK, this was around the time of the Iraq War, was becoming very anxious about its trajectory and talking about politics being played in the same old way by the same old rules, but the stadium becoming empty. And then calling for a sort of participatory democracy revolution. And you see that in the turnout figures, particularly youth turnout figures, crashing during that period. And then you see something very interesting happening in the UK in the last couple of years to turnout, both with the referendum and the latest election. Particularly with youth turnout, a massive re-engagement in politics. So something happened both in the Brexit campaign and in the campaign, particularly of Jeremy Corbyn in the latest election, to reconnect with people who had turned off, who'd left the stadium. And I think there's something promising in that as well as something frightening. Why did they turn off? This is one of the reasons that people backed away. And this is one of the reasons why the status quo is broken. And this is one of the reasons why people are also getting angry now, is that people are realizing that the benefits of modern societies are not being equally shared. You have people in a large majority of countries thinking the economy is rigged, that the government does not prioritize the concerns of people like me, and also in many places that business is not really to be trusted in. And particularly in the more economically advanced countries, we have a hope of a better life and future dissolving, and this feeling that many people have in relation to information capitalism, that the product is you, particularly if you're not paying for it, but even if you're paying for it sometimes. So, you know, what is a counterpoint to this very dark and scary picture? And some of the stuff that I've been working on is how do you connect citizens in new ways to challenge the status quo. There's a whole tradition of this in American politics, which led up to the Obama campaign in 2008, which was quite different, I think, to the campaign in 2012, which was much more data-driven. In 2008, it was much more people-powered and movement-driven, and organizations like Move On and others played a big role in this. Internationally, you've seen similar things. I was involved in helping to build Avaz, which has over 40 million members around the world, and various other campaigning organizations. There's Campact here that does this kind of work. It's been foundational in driving pushback on things like TTIP and the promotion of climate action. And then I was also Global Vice President at Change.org. This is a topical cluster of campaigns, 52 different campaigns, which have sprung up around the United States on this issue of Confederate flags and symbols there. So Change is really a platform for anyone to start a campaign on an issue that they care about. I want to talk a little bit about Bernie because I think it's a counterpoint to the story of big data, and in fact, some of the architects of the most interesting parts of the campaign, the most people-powered parts of the campaign, explicitly counterpose the model of big data to the model of big organizing, which they were trying to promote. I recommend this book, Rules for Revolutionaries, which tells some of the story and shares some of the tips. This is one of the memes which circulates about Bernie Sanders, and in the specific political conditions of 2016, well, the answer to this question was that he could do things like outraise Hillary Clinton through small donations in a number of months, and you know, extraordinary people-powered energy. Tens of thousands of supporter-organized events. Now, remember, this guy had 3% name recognition, 30 million calls in 3 months, a wide variety of passionate storytelling online, some of which was expressed through memes, some of which was expressed through videos. This is a Facebook video data from the People for Bernie Sanders, which was a citizen established page. Shows you that I can't remember Antonio's phrase, but if you have good stuff, then people will love it. The organic reach on this, almost 10 million, paid reach 8,000. Similar dynamic in the recent UK election, actually. So these were the most shared stories on social media in the UK election. And you'll see that they all lean in a certain direction. The first two are basically the same story, which is about a Facebook comment, which is very passionate, very unvarnished. One of them is the manifesto. And that's what happened in the polls during the course of that election. It's actually something we've never seen. I can't remember seeing an election where you had such a reversal with people going from Corbyn going from a massive net negative and May a massive net positive to a complete reversal of fortunes. A huge amount of that was about what was happening on social media. Partly the momentum, the movement behind Corbyn was able to reach a quarter of the UK public on Facebook in 1 week with only £700 budget and paid promotion. And you had this sort of thing happening. Hang on.
Centre, get shut down. Your library, shut down. Your fire station, shut down. Your police station, shut down. Tory vulture capitalists, property speculators.
I'm going to skip over that because it's jumping a little bit. But it's basically a mashed up piece of popular communication which reached millions of people, which has a nice bit about Apple, Google, Facebook not paying any tax. I'm going to finish, because I know I'm running out of time and we're running out of time for the session as a whole, by talking a little bit about, in a more utopian way, about whether and how we can open up big data to have more of a constructive impact. And here I want to talk first very briefly about two traditions which have emerged in the recent decade or so. One is civic technology, which actually, Facebook also makes a contribution to. Antonio referenced this, but a lot of it happens in the non-market space. Another is open data, which is opening up government information, to some extent market information as well, empowering people, growing the commons, providing a better basis for our societies. So these are movements which are having an impact, although not fully transforming the market at this point in time. I want to talk very briefly about what we do at Crowdpack. So we're using big data rather than to manipulate and market to people. We're trying to use it to inform and empower citizens. So we do data on the politicians. We have all of the donation data back to 1980 or so, and done big data analysis of correlations between that, which seems to describe and predict about 92% of their votes in Congress at the moment. Unfortunately, we also analyse votes and bills and social networks and speech and text, and then provide people with these sort of simple analyses of where people stand on spectrums, e.g. from liberal to conservative, and then you can drill down into the underlying data as well. And this is some of the data journalism stuff we're doing on top of that. Around conflicts of interest and corruption. We use the data to power voter information and engagement tools. So this, for instance, is some of the data we had on Macron in the recent French elections. According to our data, his supporters are actually significantly more interventionist than him, which may be one of the reasons why his support is looking thin and fading at the moment, given some of his recent actions. And we're also trying to open up politics and increase participation across the board, so increase participation in primaries in the US, which are often the elections that matter, crowdfunding, helping people stand for office. There's a Catherine Allen here who's challenging one of the incumbent Republicans in Utah, and has got real traction on that, partly around the Russia issue. We're not a traditional company, although we do have investors. We're a social venture. We really care about user data and user trust. We don't and won't sell our users' individual data. And we've got a revenue model which is user aligned. We actually invite people to basically give us a chunk of their donations to sustain the platform, and thus far they seem to be doing that in large numbers. A couple of other signs of hope. Currently going through an election here in Germany. This initiative, Who Targets Me, in the UK elections was quite effective and interesting. People were installing browser plugins which were tracking the political ads that were being served to them through Facebook. This is really to work around the challenge of dark ads, where you don't know what is being served to you, where it's coming from, and they built up a very comprehensive database of how Facebook was being used to advertise. It's being launched in this election. If Putin's going to target any election in Europe, I think it might be this one. So I'd encourage you all to have a look at that. Just launched with BuzzFeed Germany, I think. people like Avaz and other movements are looking at campaigning and pressuring Zuckerberg on this issue of dark ads specifically, which is fairly critical when it comes to transparency of what's happening in the public sphere, although there are all sorts of challenges I'm sure Antonio would identify. I think there is a sort of utopian question for us all, which is, can we open the black boxes? Who benefits from all of this stuff? Can we make information work for the many? And is there a brighter, sunnier future ahead for us? And in a way, if there isn't, what are we all doing? Should we all be retreating to islands? There is a utopian call to say your data is yours, that a great deal of the value that's accumulated by people like Facebook is being created by people in their behaviors and actions. And thus far, Zuckerberg is showing a great deal of responsiveness, actually, on some of these issues like fake news after initial resistance, which indicates that he may be concerned about legitimacy and user trust and those sorts of things. There are utopian questions about whether either an existing social media platform or a new one could emerge in which users part own the data that they have on that platform and or the platform itself. I don't think we're there yet, but we may not be that far away. Things are moving fast at the moment. And there is, and I was laughing when I was seeing Hannes's image earlier. There is this question about, we are now living in a world where there are new monopolies. Should they become network public utilities instead? I'm going to finish with this, which is the ending of that little parable or drawing from Stafford Beer in his 1974 book about a better outlook for cybernetic man than the one in which your new politics is delivered to you on a plate, which actually looks quite a lot like the web. It does have a principle in it, which is don't tell anyone else unless I say so. Anyway, I think that we are in the middle of a dark wood on this stuff. I do think that leadership, movements and communities can play a huge role in shifting and changing the terms of engagement in markets and states. And I continue to be an optimist, building civic ventures to try and constructively engage on this. But I think it's worth us all also understanding the challenges and confronting them very seriously.
So, thank you. Thank you, Paul, for kind of showing us that these new technologies can also be used to enhance transparency and get people involved in campaigning. I think we have a lot to discuss, but probably we'll have a lunch break right now and get you a beer, Paul. Thanks for going through all these technical difficulties, and don't be scared. We have 1 hour to fix it and are looking forward to a great panel with Ulrike Guerreau, Carol Cadwallader, Fabio Chiusi from Italy, and Operation Libero telling about their the way they used Facebook to actually combat the populist leader in Switzerland. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Richard.